of Development Control Committee. I'll just do some housekeeping stuff before we get onto the agenda. So can everyone please make sure that your mobile phones are either off or on silent. Councillors using the Modern Gov application to access the document pack for the meeting may continue to use their electronic devices, but only for that purpose. The meeting, the public, the meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast, unless we go into confidential sessions for exempt items, which I don't think we will be. So therefore, by entering the council chamber and using the public seating areas, you are de facto consenting to be filmed. If that's a problem, then our Democratic Services Officer at the end of the bench here can talk to you about that, but I'm presuming you're all okay with being filmed. And for the committee, as you know, if you want to speak, raise your hands, wait for an invitation from me, and turn your microphone off when you finish speaking. And speak as loudly and clearly as you can into the microphone for the benefit of the members of the public and the cameras, etc. And if you're referring to a specific report page or slide, please mention the report page or slide so that we all know what's being discussed. And for the public, anyone who hasn't been to a Development Control Committee before, it's pretty obvious really. The people sat in the centre are members of the committee. I'm the chair of the committee, and up here with me are planning officers, legal officer, and as I said, our Democratic Services Officer. Right. Yes.
Chair, if I may, I'd also just like to make a quick introduction to committee. We have with us this evening Lucy, who's a new member of our team in our majors sites. She'll be dealing with our large-scale majors, so she's here this evening just to see how it all works, and I'm sure you'll come across her in due course.
Yes, I was going to introduce Lucy at the last DCC, but she wasn't available for that meeting, so welcome, Lucy. Right, okay, I was taking it slow in the hope that Councillor Luff might turn up before... there we go. Excellent. Okay, so we're on the committee papers and we're on apologies. I've got apologies from Councillors Callan, Fenton and Ryder. I don't think there's any other apologies. No, okay. Declarations of interest, I'm not aware of any. Stick your hand up if you have any. No, fine. Minutes of the last meeting. If you agree that I can sign the minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, 2nd of September 2025, can you just raise your hand to indicate you're okay with that, unless somebody has a problem? No. Okay, so on to the planning schedule. And the first item is land northeast of Kingston Road, Slimbridge. This variation of condition 2 from the approved plans from application S23 1593 FUL, installation and operation of a 36 megawatt battery storage facility and ancillary equipment, 180-degree rotation of the transformer, reduction and repositioning of the BESS units, and resizing the DNO control room. Case officer on this is Eleanor, who is going to introduce her report now. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good evening, everybody. We are here again to discuss the battery storage in Slimbridge. As the Chair highlighted, this is a variation, Section 73 application, where we're considering changes. The principle of development has already been established, so just bear that in mind. So quick refresher on a location. The red square is approximate location of our application site. The two large squares, the bigger one of the two is the wetland centre, and you can just about see the River Severn estuary. And the small circle is the nearby Riles Lane DNO station. That's a substation. So we have an approved scheme for battery storage. It is not directly connected to any other facility. It is a rebalancing scheme. So it only consists of the batteries and the ancillary infrastructure with it. So this is the approved scheme, just for your information. So the application we are considering is resizing of the containers. We have the rotation of the actual transformer. Sorry, I'm just trying to, I did not help myself here with the description of what is considered in detail. There we go. So we are looking at rotation of the transformer. So that is this element. We can't see it. That's where the connection takes place. The reduction of number of the battery storage units, you can just about see that they're spaced apart a bit more. I will cover that a bit more in detail later in the presentation. The resizing of the DNO building, that is a building where the metering equipment is stored, and we are increasing the distance between the boundary from 3 meters to 5 meters. So the rotation of a transformer is by 180 degrees. Because we don't have any agreed connection, that rotation alone will have no impact on the visual, on the landscape or the visual impact of the scheme. As per reduction of the battery storage units, as you can see on a detailed drawing, the original scheme was proposing what are translated as a large container storage units. The new scheme positions the batteries, because they change in their efficiency. The same sort of amount of batteries now fits into half of that storage element, but because they are positioned next to each other, they still look like a single container. Nevertheless, on a scheme as a whole, that reduces the number of the actual battery units from 22 in total to 17 only, and they are arranged in pairs. That allows for much bigger distances between the individual storage containers. These are the details we've been provided, but this is what the battery units actually are. As I explained, the battery storage unit is 20 foot, and the power converter systems, which allows it to function, is still the same size as the previous scheme. Now, members will recall that last time we were discussing this scheme, we were looking at a much larger DNO building. So I've put the comparison between the current scheme and the approved scheme. The approved scheme had an L-shape building in place. The new proposal has a rectangular building, which is marginally bigger than the approved one. The marginal increase relates to the infilling of the L shape. So it is not much bigger, and visually it will be not possible to see the difference between the approved and the current application scheme. The height of the building remains as permitted at 4.1 meters. These are the elevations where the measurements are clearly outlined. And as I explained, these direct comparisons between the current proposal and the previously permitted building. So you can see the dimensions are really very comparable. The height isn't any higher. The most sensitive visual impact is from the nearby footpath. The approved scheme had a visual impact as shown. Because the current proposed building is no higher and it's in the same location as the approved building, that remains the same. So visually, visual impact of the scheme is pretty much the same as the approved scheme we've already seen. Now, you probably can't see it in much detail, but the building's visible from a view V5, 5A, I believe. It's from Longaston Lane, I believe. You can't really see. You can see just about the battery and just about a bit of a brick building, but that impact will soften as the vegetation grows. As you can see, the current application scheme looks very similar to the approved. What has changed significantly between the originally approved scheme in 2023 to the current variation is that we had a lot more guidance, technical guidance as to how to deal with proposals of this type. Environment Agency have issued guidance on what we need to look out for and how to put conditions in place to mitigate any impacts. As you would have seen in my report, we have considered the new guidance, and as a result of it, we have reworded the SUDS conditions, that's a surface water runoff drainage condition, and we have split the previous condition dealing with the fire safety into two individual conditions. One deals with the safety of the batteries and how that's managed, and the other one deals with the fire safety and how any fire will be managed. Accordingly, we also changed wording of the informatives about who and when will be consulted when these conditions are to be discharged. It is our professional opinion that the application should be approved subject to the conditions in my report. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleanor. I should have just checked. I assume everybody's had time to had the opportunity to look at the late pages. Yeah. If anybody does need a minute or two, no. Okay, that's fine then. All right. In that case, we go on into speaking, and I've got Councillor Lindsay Green, who's one of the ward members, who's going to be speaking. You don't have a time limit, but as I always say, we appreciate brevity. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'm representing not only myself but Slimbridge Parish Council, and I also have a letter from the proposed SEND school that is in very close proximity of this site. So Slimbridge Parish Council strongly object to this planning application, which poses a significant and unacceptable harm to our local environment, community safety and the character of Slimbridge. The proposal continues to represent an increase in the size of the building compared to what was originally approved. This has a deeply overbearing effect on the surrounding countryside, contrary to local plan policy ES3, which requires development to conserve character and appearance of the rural area. The visual impact is further compounded by the fact that any proposed hedging is now incapable of mitigating the scale of the building, demonstrating that landscaping cannot fix the visual harm from a building this size. This visual harm also violates policy ES7 of the local plan, as well as the Slimbridge Neighbourhood Development Plan SD1, which seek to protect landscape character and ensure new development fits appropriately within its setting. This proposal fails on both counts. The design brings no benefit to the community. In fact, its scale and character directly harm the village landscape, contravening both local plan policy ES2, NDP policy SCE5, which require proposals to contribute positively to their surroundings. This development does the opposite. The inappropriate design and appearance also run counter to policy CP14, which states that new development should respect and integrate with local setting. This application stands out within the locality. It disrespects the character of Slimbridge Parish and undermines the sense of place that is valued. Most critically, the fire risk associated with this proposal remains unresolved and serious concern. The entire reason behind the revised plans is a previously identified fire risk, yet no emergency or evacuation plan had been submitted for scrutiny before construction begins. This is completely unacceptable. During a recent meeting with the fire service, it is noted that government legislation around battery energy storage systems is weak. Gloucestershire Fire Service can advise and hope the developers cooperate. In this case, It is unsure if the developers have even contacted the fire service. This raises serious questions. If the developers are not willing to engage now, how can reassurance be given that suitable evacuation and safety plans are in place and will protect the community in the future? This site is bordered by high-risk areas, including local residents, a canal, a caravan park, a pub, a cafe, and even a proposed special educational needs school. How can battery storage be approved that could potentially trap people in the event of an emergency? There's only one route in and one route out of the site, which according to legislation is another major failing, as legislation recommends at least 2 access routes. Slimbridge Parish Council and residents are asking for transparency. We want the fire service to fully assess these risks, and we demand that a written emergency and evacuation plan be made publicly available before any decision is made. It is essential that an evacuation and emergency plans are in place and have been shared with local businesses and residents so as they know the procedures in these circumstances. So to conclude, this application fails planning policy on multiple levels, from design and landscape character to safety and community impact. The Planning Committee has a duty to uphold the local plan and NDP, and most importantly, to protect public safety. Slimbridge Parish Council therefore ask that this application be refused, or at the very least, deferred until these fundamental concerns, especially around fire safety, are properly addressed and the agreements are in place with the fire service. I've also received today a letter from the people at Belong Learning, which are the providers of potentially a special educational needs school, literally within spitting distance of the site. And they have sent me: we are concerned regarding the close proximity of the battery storage facility to our site, Wild Goose Lodge, Slimbridge. We note that in the late pages filed with Stroud District Council Development Committee that Slimbridge Energy Limited write, we fully recognise that fire safety and battery safety are genuine and understandable public concerns. As the project owner and the intended operator, fire safety is a key priority. The latest planning application is subject to planning conditions requiring submission and approval of a battery safety management plan, a fire safety management plan, and an emergency response plan. We ask that these plans include our proposal for a special school within close proximity to the site, and we also request that each of these plans are shared in detail with us so we can accurately complete our own risk assessment and mitigations accordingly. Until such time that we receive the details of each of these plans, we express our concern regarding the risk that the proposed battery storage facility may pose to our site and the safe use of, and therefore we object to the proposal before DCC today. I don't think I need to say much more as ward member. I think both Slimbridge Parish Council and Belong Learning have actually said probably far more eloquently than I could what my concerns are. So I would also reiterate that I think this should also be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And next we've got Councillor Mike State from Slimbridge Parish Council. You'll have a time limit of 4 minutes, and there'll be a counter up on the screen, so if you keep an eye on that. If you're getting close, I'll give you a warning.
Thank you, Chair. If you know me, I'm very brief on this sort of thing. Our District Councillor and the submission by the Parish Council have given the committee detailed technical reasons for not supporting this application. I just want to emphasise a few key points. By and large, the residents of Slimbridge support renewable energy projects. The first solar panels in the Stroud district, I think, were in Slimbridge. However, by putting an industrial scale battery farm on a greenfield site in the middle of the countryside is not sensible planning and has truly angered the residents. If this unit had been placed adjacent to the A38 next to the solar farm, I don't think you'd have had any objections. The current proposal had no safety plans in place prior to this application, and it's good to see that the officers have insisted that a battery safety management plan, a fire safety management plan and an emergency response plan are in place before or when the power is generated. Residents have a real concerns about the single road access to the site in case of a fire. Fires are not unknown in battery farms of this scale. The Slimbridge Wildfowl Trust is a premier tourist attraction for the Stroud district, and the thought of trapping hundreds of visitors between a fire and the River Severn would be horrendous. If a fire did take place, the pollution effects of the drainage system would ruin the Wildfowl Trust and the wetlands for decades. Finally, in a few months' time, this committee will be deciding on whether to allow the old Slimbridge Youth Hostel to become a special needs school. This is sited just one field away from the battery farm. Common sense and sensible planning would tell you these two applications are incongruous. If this application is passed, surely this committee then can't put a special school next to it. I urge this committee to reject this proposal and put the battery farm in a more appropriate place, even that's if it's in Slimbridge, but not where it is now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, that's public speaking. So next we have questions from members to officers. And I'm going to take one question to keep the flow going, and then with the option of a follow-up question, and then go to somebody else just to keep things moving so that we don't get a lot of repetition. Okay, so anybody? Yes, Dave and then Carol. Okay, Carol and Dave.
Can I ask two, please? Can we see on a map where this special school is going to be? I can't quite visualise where that's going to be. It'd be one. I'm not sure if it's on the map there, but
I am not sure that the school has a planning permission as yet, so we do not consider it to be in place until it's formally permitted. So we do not think there's a planning permission for the school.
okay. But if it was, or where is? Put it the other way then. Where's this defunct youth hostel? Oh, you've got it there. It's all right. Somebody's shown it to me. Don't worry. Thanks. Have a look at that. The other thing I wondered if you could say a little bit more about how you're going to insist that the SUD issue is dealt with, the drainage issue.
So I have quite significantly altered the wording of the SUDS condition. It is included in my report. It includes a requirement to show how the greenfield runoff is dealt with, but then it also requires details of surface water runoff containment to prevent discharge of any pollutant into nearby ditches and watercourses.
Containment is the key word there, isn't it?
Yes, Dave, and then I've got Gary.
Thank you. I'll go with two questions as well, if I may then. The first one is on cable routing, and I know that we haven't got the routing through yet, and I know that it's not in the control of the applicant. Do you know whether there's any good reason why the routing hasn't been proposed? And if there isn't a good reason, when we might expect to get it brought forward?
So this is a variation of an existing planning permission, which did not have or did not specify the connecting route. So we don't have the detail of the connecting route and we cannot speculate. We know that the first ever permission did define a route, but there were concerns about the length and the fact that it was using the ditches along the road. We do not have any details of the route all details we do have. However, you would see the late papers that includes some details of the routing, and it includes a statement that any routing will be underground. So that is the detail we have. We do know that if you go underground, you will have to comply with the habitats regulation. So it will be responsibility of those who deal with the route. If it is a statutory provider, they are under the same obligation to comply with habitats regulations as we are. So either way, there's a responsibility to deal with that element of sensitivity of the area.
And then my second question is just, and you might be able to flash back to your photo of the, or not photo, the mock-up of the battery units. And it's just on the colour of the units. And I know that they've proposed that we have the other one. It's actually got the Photoshop of the battery units in situ. That one, yeah. The proposal is to have them in green. A suggestion might be to have them in black instead, because they'll actually, looking at the site, they'll actually be much less visible if they were black or very dark green compared to the colour they are now. Maybe as an informative or suggestion.
So there is a condition 3, which requires the applicant to submit details of materials. So we will get a colour scheme in place and we can negotiate it accordingly. We can ask details to justify it and so on. So there is time to negotiate that at the discharge of condition stage.
Chair, if I may, good evening, members. I think, Councillor Matthews, you're verging slightly into a debate territory there. If you want to discuss the colour of the units, it's a matter for members once we've got through questions.
Yes, Gary.
Mine's about fire safety. The emergency response plan that we're now conditioning, was that attached to the previous or the extant permission that's currently there?
So the extant permission has a single condition dealing with the fire safety, where we do ask for evacuation plan as part of that management plan. But because the guidance have evolved and our understanding of how and what needs to be dealt with during a fire, post-fire event and so on, we've covered that in a different individual conditions, and that's why we have 2 separate ones. One deals with the fire management of the battery storage unit itself, and then the other one deals with the fire event and management of everything else.
So we're actually getting more information about what they would do in the event of a fire.
We are getting a lot more information. So we're getting information about the safety of the units themselves, what sort of suppression systems they contain and how they work. And then we're having the other one, which deals with the fire management, shows things like where the fire engines are going, where the access is, and so on.
And they wouldn't be able to start this site. Oh, sorry, this is like 3 questions, but there is really one proper question. They wouldn't be able to start operating the site until officers are satisfied by those plans.
Yes, this is a pre-commencement condition. So this is before the batteries are on site.
Can I do another question if there's nobody else?
Millie's waiting, so can I come back to you in
yeah.
a second? Millie? Okay, go on then.
Mine's very quickly. Is the risk of fire, now that they've got greater separation distances between the batteries and the foliage and the battery units themselves, is the risk of fire greater or lesser than it was previously?
I am not an expert and I can't answer that question, unfortunately.
Yeah, Millie, and then I've got Martin.
Thank you, Chair. This has been before the committee a couple of times before. Can I just absolutely clarify? We're not being asked to make a decision on whether this should go ahead, merely on whether we should allow variation. Is that correct?
Yes, so the principle's been established already. It is a variation of the condition to cover those elements like the rotation of the transformer and the different size of the building and spacing in between the containers and so on. The principle itself has been established, and the applicant can go tomorrow and start discharging condition on the extent permission.
Yes, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Recognise that this is an evolving area of sort of legislation and regulation on battery storage. What is the position relative to any new requirements that might come through? Would the developer have to comply with them if they come into place before the battery storage is completed, or once they've started, then that no longer applies? How does that evolving sort of potential regulatory framework impact on, the construction and sort of the planning conditions for them?
So the way it works, the Section 73 application works as a standalone permission, and it creates a situation then if we approve this application, it still gives the applicant an opportunity to implement the extant permission. We know that the reason they're seeking the variation is because they need it to make it operationally better and more efficient. But with our current conditions, we've already followed the evolution of the guidance and the batteries themselves, because they evolved quite quickly. So when it comes to the discharge of the conditions, again, we're going to have more details, and we're going to be consulting those with the experts like a fire chief and their department, who will then comment on the merits of the fire safety plan, for example, and it will be their comments we will consider very carefully. So we may find ourselves with several applications to discharge this condition.
Thank you. I think, Councillor Piercy, if I've got a slightly wider take on that, which I think you were asking about statutory legislation. So what Eleanor has said is absolutely right when it comes to the discharge of our conditions. If some statutory legislation is introduced at a later date that manages that, says that these storage facilities should meet a certain requirement, then the operator would need to meet that requirement under that piece of statute. So we wouldn't then come back to us necessarily, they would just go ahead and meet those legislative requirements. This is one of those areas where planning is always the fallback position, where we have a primary piece of legislation. At the moment, we don't have a primary piece of legislation, which is why we're trying to manage this in the evolving world through planning conditions. It's not ideal. If that legislation came forward, that would be the primary legislation, and then they would have a regulatory and enforcing authority through that piece of legislation.
Probably just to support what both planning officers have said, we're dealing with planning here. This site will also come under other regulatory regimes, and as and when regulations change under those regimes, the standards may increase. But what you're doing is granting the most up-to-date condition you can at this particular moment in time.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just wanted to clarify whether we are sort of, through the planning process, we are sort of sticking with a particular level in terms of the technical and regulatory requirement, or whether it will evolve with new regulations. And it's clearly the answer is that it will evolve, because they will then supersede or overtake the planning. Thank you.
Yes, we're working with guidance. Well, luckily, the guidance is improving, catching up with the technology, but hopefully there'll be legislation. Sorry, I've got... Who had the hand up? Millie again, and then the mouse.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for the planning team. I realise this might be slightly left field, but I'm interested in the comments from the Slimbridge Parish Council speaker about how there would have been less opposition if the battery storage had been located nearer to the solar panels and up on the A38. My understanding from previous discussions is that it's related to this position in relation to the grid. Is that correct? Is there a reason why it is in the middle of open fields and not right up next to the already quite established solar fields?
Unfortunately, we did not have to consider site selection at the application stage because it wasn't required of us to do so. So we cannot influence the site selection. We have to judge it on its merits when it arrives. And because although the battery storage itself is not considered to be renewable energy by itself, it is a very important element of infrastructure to allow us to switch towards that generation of electricity. So on that principle, the first application was allowed in the greenfield because it didn't need to have to demonstrate the site selection criteria.
Thank you.
Melza, and then I've got Dave.
I obviously noticed that you have got plans to get in reports regarding fire, etc. Is there a plan to consult with the parish council and get any form of feedback from them on this? Because obviously they feel quite strongly about it, and I think it would be wise to consult with them.
So it was at the previous stages, I think it was when we were discussing the currently extant scheme, we have agreed an additional informative where we consult parish council on a certain condition discharges. It is covered in my informatives. That hasn't changed. We just expanded the number of conditions we're going to let the parish council know about.
Yes, Dave.
Did I hear correctly, Alina, that the purpose of the battery storage facility is for grid balancing rather than being associated with a specific generation site? So in terms of location, it doesn't need to be next to a solar farm or a wind farm. It's purely for grid balancing. Is that correct?
In this case, that is correct. We do very often find facility like that to be positioned within or in conjunction with a solar farm because it serves that particular facility. But this particular scheme does not show any association with any other scheme.
Yes, Gary.
Can I just clarify the bit around the parish council? It says at informative 8, in discharging, it shall notify Slimbridge Parish Council. Is that the extent of our responsibilities here?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, any more questions for officers? If not, I think we still need to have a proposal. Does anybody wish to propose officer advice, which is to permit in order to get, if not, I'll propose it from the chair and seek a seconder. Okay, yes, Gary. You happy to propose?
I'll propose to get it started, yeah.
Okay. I'll second that from the chair. Okay. Right. So I'm the seconder. I'm not in a hurry to speak, so anybody like to kick off debate? Maybe Dave, did you want to ask a bit more? Well, yeah, I think you've already got your answer about the colour. Carol, yes.
It seems to me that this is an improvement on the original scheme from most points of view, i.e. safer and, well, that's probably the most important thing, safer. And as regards being in the middle of a green field, I can see that that spoils the outlook and is visually a problem. But from a fire safety point of view, it's presumably better to be away from other things. So I think there's pros and cons for that one. So, but basically, because it's an improvement, I think we should support officer recommendation on this one.
Anybody else? Dave?
Well, I'm inclined to agree, and I think the key thing here is that the substantive scheme has been approved long ago, and we're just considering variation applications. And as Carol says, they make perfect sense. You know, they improve the safety, they improve the consultation. There are still some unknowns that we need to make sure we take proper care of. But I can't see any good reason why we would want to go against officer recommendation at this stage.
Anybody else? Yes, Demelza.
I guess a bit of a curveball with this one is I appreciate we've already made a decision. We can't go back on that decision. What concerns me is what we're gaining is they've just got to send a report in. That doesn't necessarily mean what's in the report is going to be hugely beneficial. So I'm just not sure. And I have to say I am immensely worried that we are allowing our residents, our parish council, our local businesses to be informed as opposed to be consulted on something that could have a really significant effect if there's a fire there. It doesn't bear thinking about, and it does worry me. I appreciate we've made the initial decision and this is where we're stuck. This is just a variation, but I am still incredibly worried that all we're doing is informing residents once a report comes in. So.
Yes, Gary.
I'm not sure that's what the condition says. It says we have to approve it and it has to be prepared in accordance with the latest guidance of the Fire and Rescue Service. And that seems to be evolving quite quickly. And I also think, I know we've had some MP involvement in this in the late pages, but it's up to Parliament to pass, or the HSE to pass legislation that says this isn't safe, we should do something about it. But at the moment, we are allowing ourselves to say this does comply with the latest regulations when it comes, and it might be a while away, and that will evolve. And I think my understanding was that the planning requirement is just a flaw, and if the HSE wants higher regulations around this, then that's completely up to the government to do those, and it might be something that the MP wants to encourage if he's genuinely concerned about it. I'm sure he is concerned about it, and he's certainly reflecting the concerns of some of his constituents, and that is open to him. But as a planning, we have our original extant permission, and we're not changing very much. I know the residents don't want it to happen. That's been clear through all the applications, and I can understand that. But we are in a place where we are, where we've already given permission, and we're not really making it any worse, and we're getting a slightly better. And if we don't improve it, they'll just go back to the old one. It just cost a bit more, but it'll be less safe.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, Gary rescued it with a summary at the end of his speech there. I think that, we are changing it, not very much, but these are changes for the better. They improve safety, they improve engagement, and they give us more say over the future safety of the facility. So, refusing it today would make this site less safe because the permission already exists, and I think that would be a big mistake for us.
Anybody else? Yes, Martin.
I'll just add my voice that, I think this is a general improvement to the one that we've already given permission for. I do expect that there'll be further changes in the requirements going forward, and depending on how quickly this plan application is commenced, then it may come back to here to ensure that it then complies with the new and improved requirements. The letter that from the MP does suggest that the developer does want to speak to Slimbridge Parish Council, and I do understand their concerns and the concerns of the residents. I just have to take that on face value that they are going to genuinely have some engagement with the community. And I think that to impose that on there wouldn't be the right approach. So I think through the emergency plan that they will do that, they will share that, and hopefully receive comment back from it before it gets signed off.
Yes.
Sorry, members, I don't want to intrude on your debate, but we just want to correct something and qualify something, because you are having a conversation about these conditions. We previously said we'd use the trigger prior to commencement. We have not. We've used the trigger prior to first import or export. So theoretically, the development could get built up to the point where it could be operational, but the restriction is on operations commencing. So that's an important point of clarity given the debate that you're having at the moment. It doesn't really change much from a planning point of view. It's just when we would enforce. We wouldn't be enforcing that when they start building. We would be enforcing that if they were to import or export electricity. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for my intrusion.
And presumably if there was... Sorry, Carol, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to follow up on that. It's a question more than a comment, really, I'm afraid. But is there a reason that you put the trigger as being at first export of electricity rather than before they started building it? Because it would seem more sensible to have it at the beginning.
I agree, and I am sorry that I potentially misled you. I just suddenly jumped to conclusion without necessarily double checking in my own wording. We can discuss change of the trigger, but we have previously, the first original condition included this pre-operation trigger. We therefore followed the same. So operation is the appropriate point to have those safety management plans in place, because they depend on the type and the make of the battery they're going to be installing, and that might not be always known at the commencement time. So if you lay down a road, you might not yet have ordered your batteries, if that makes sense.
It does, but I'm surprised that they would start building without knowing what sort of batteries they were using.
Okay, Jeremy would like to jump in with a bit of legal advice.
Well, more practical, really. I mean, looking at it, it's going to be unlikely that someone would invest at the expense of constructing something, not knowing whether they could use it or not. So, at the end of the day, the concerns around safety won't be impacted upon this, because there won't be any import or export of electricity to or from the batteries until the fire conditions have been met. I think that's right, isn't it? My reading of it?
I wasn't listening.
Not quite.
I wasn't listening.
Oh, right, to the money. Yeah, they are. It's just, I can follow your disappointment. It does sound different, but I think at the end of the day, the thing will be built, but they won't be able to use it unless those conditions have been satisfied, unless the LPA are satisfied that they've met that condition. So in a roundabout way, it achieves the same thing.
Yeah, but it's to an extent, it's a decision which they won't know the answer to until they know what the fire service are going to say and whether we've approved it. So I'd have thought it would make sense from their point of view too, at least for them to consult informally before they start building.
If I may, Chair, I'm just going to take us back to some of the technicalities of planning conditions. So we will use a trigger because we have to use a trigger to make sure that condition is enforceable. Now, whether the developer chooses to submit at that trigger or whether they choose to submit at an appropriate point in their build timeline, it doesn't really matter for us. What we are saying is that you will not be able to use this facility until this is agreed. We also will remember our tests of a planning condition, necessary to planning, directly related to the development. And in this one, we're talking about necessity. So our condition should only be applied where it is necessary. We believe it is necessary, but it needs to be applied at the point it is necessary in that process. We also are legally required to get the applicant's permission for a prior to commencement condition. They are not in our gift just to dash them onto planning permissions. The government consider that to be a barrier to growth, is the pesky planning authority applying prior to commencement conditions. So there's also an operational impact in here. So I can understand the concern. The reason I wasn't quite following what Jeremy was saying was because I was just having a quick check-in with Alana. But operationally, in terms of our planning permissions, I think you should be reasonably satisfied that first import and first export is the appropriate place to apply this condition. There is a condition on the permission, condition 20, your last condition, which requires them to tell us that first import export date. So we've tied all the conditions up with one another.
Yeah, Gary.
To some extent, I think that's the developer's problem. But the risk just genuinely manifests itself when you start importing and exporting electricity. So I think that's the right place for it to be, on the import and export of electricity. If we want to change that, we can debate that, I guess. But it seems to me that's the developer's problem. And also in this really the amount of battery storage is increasing exponentially in this country. And so the rules, if they're not right, will catch up pretty quickly. So I think the later that plan has to be provided, the better, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, but they can always come in with another variation, and actually a later trigger allows them more flexibility in making sure that they're meeting whatever legislation comes. I've got Martin and Dave. I think Martin was slightly ahead of Dave, unless you're really desperate to come in on that particular point. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, if it's relevant to that point, then thank you. Yeah.
I'm not sure, actually, that the risk point is at the point of import-export. And I'm not certain about this, but I have a feeling that the fire risk primarily exists even in an empty battery, and it's the components of the battery that present the fire risk. So I wonder if under this trigger point, whether we can ask the officers to consult and do further research, and then give them the authority to make the decision about whether the trigger point is import-export or whether it's import of the first, or bringing on site of the first battery. Because I think that might be the risk point where the fire risk is introduced.
Yeah, the problem with us is that we're still working with evolving guidance and hopefully imminent legislation. Did you want to come in on that, or shall I carry on with the debate? I've got Martin next. Martin?
Yeah, I can't really comment on Dave's comment there that where the risk is. So if you're not putting any current through the battery, then there can't be too much of a risk. But it depends on whether any current's coming from anywhere else, I guess, or whether they test it or something like that. I don't know. It's a technical area. I don't know. What I was going to actually say was, following on from Gary's point, I think it's obviously the later we've got the trigger point in the process, then the later, that we're going to have the latest set of legislation or regulations. So that allows us more time to make sure that we're in ticket in terms of the regulations. So, it's at the developer's risk, isn't it? If they build it and legislation changes before they then want to import and export, well, they'll have to comply with the new legislation.
Yeah, that's basically the point I was making, yeah. There's pros and cons to both, I guess. Did officers want to come in on that point?
Thank you. So this is coming back to the point that Councillor Matthews was making. So we are currently now in debate. The motion is to approve as per officer recommendation. So there's a process to be followed here that Jeremy will correct me on. I think the concerns, if you are contemplating a motion, Councillor Matthews, is defining that. So you've got an option is, we think it should be deferred so that officers can go away and do that research and come back at a later date. That's a fairly clear motion, and that gives us jurisdiction to go away, do that, but bring it back to committee. If you're thinking about an alternative motion where you're implying that there's some degree of acceptability, that would really need to be defined in the decision that the committee makes now, so that officers can go away and have certainty about what it is that members are deciding. So you were saying something along the lines of if there's no risk, then officers can terminate, and if there is not, then they'd have to bring it back. I think that's probably not very clear as a motion, so you need to have a think about that if you are going to make presumably, Jeremy, you'd be happy for that to be an amendment?
Any change to the current motion would need to be an amendment, but the amendment needs to be clear, and I would stress that it wouldn't be advisable to change conditions on the basis of something that might be correct or might not, because we don't have that knowledge in the room. So I think if you are minded to move an amendment, it would have to be along the lines of deferring it.
Could I just test the winds? Does anybody feel that they would like to move an amendment of the kind that's been discussed? Because if nobody's madly keen on doing that, then we're just going around in circles.
I don't want to defer. I think that would be a cop-out. This is in my mind, this is a relatively small question about where is the fire risk triggered, and I suspect that the fire risk is triggered when the first battery is introduced to the site, not when the first charge is made. And therefore, my proposal was, and it might have been clumsily worded, my proposal was simply to say, to ask the planning officers to clarify the question about when is the fire risk triggered. Is it the bringing on site of a battery discharged, or is it the bringing on site of electricity into an existing battery? And then to make the adjustment to the condition according to what they find. What I don't want to do is to defer the whole decision because we've got everything we need to make that decision today.
Chair, so that Griff and I have had a discussion, and I'll let him come in around perhaps just amending the trigger points, which may deal with it.
Yeah, so I invest quite a lot of time of our officer CPD in thinking about trigger points. So it is something we try and assess. Now, I think if I understand it correctly, what you're saying is members may have a concern that the risk starts sooner from the importation of a battery onto that site. So commencement is defined in the Planning Act. Now, it can be a very number of things. So if in this instance, due to our other conditions, it's likely to be access. We have a condition 5, that requires the access to be provided before the rest of the development. So the access is likely to be commencement. There's a question for members to how long do we think it's reasonable between the commencement of the development, the implementation of the access, and the importation of any battery facilities, because you could try and do some clever wording here which says within X period of time from the commencement of development or prior to the first import-export, whichever is the soonest, then we seek those documents to come sooner. So we could figure that I don't think it's feasible for us to be able to come away from this meeting without deferring it to give a definitive answer on risk. I don't think the planning department will know that, and as the debate has come around so far, this is a new technology, so I'm not even sure what our source for that information would be. So I think my advice would be that if you have a concern about there being batteries on site for a long time, we try and adjust that trigger.
Yes, I was going to say pretty much the same thing, that given the state we're in with guidance and lack of legislation, how we actually decide any of this is a bit problematic. Did anybody else want to come in on debate? And then I assume we'd still be looking at the possibility of some kind of an amendment, wouldn't we? Yeah. Gary?
There's two things I would say. I think the risk is actually graduated. So if there's a fire with unenergised batteries, they're still lithium batteries and it spreads, it can be bad. But obviously, the more they're energised, the more likely that fire is going to be. So we could have some. Would it be a friendly amendment anyway if I was happy with, a change? We could change the motion. I haven't got a problem.
I think it's more sort of legally correct if you move an amendment. So that will need a mover, a proposer, and a seconder. And then the committee can, if it's happy to, vote on that. And then if it's passed, that will become the substantive motion, and then you vote on it again. So you just vote twice, I think.
Yeah.
Chart, which I think I drafted some time ago. Yes, that's right. Councillor Matthews, Griff, if you could help with the amendment.
That would be great. You took the words out of my mouth, Jeremy. If I could ask officers to suggest an amendment that I can then propose, that would be helpful.
Demelza, did you want to join in before they come up with a wording which you might be happy with or not?
I think my only comment was none of us have got any knowledge in this room of actually behind this. So I think Dave's hit the nail on the head with his comments. Not one of us, including the planning team, who have admitted, know anything about this. And what worries me is we're trying to guess. Good point, when they're energised it's going to make it worse, but there could still be a fire. I don't know what the answer is. Deferring it would give us an opportunity to learn, but yeah, it's a very difficult one. But Dave hit the nail on the head, I'm afraid. We do not have the knowledge in this room. We really don't.
Yes, it's not the first time that's been said in this chamber around this issue of battery storage. Sorry, Dave, were you wanting to say something again? No. Okay, then I've got Carol and who else had their hand up? And okay, Carol and then Martin.
Sorry, it's only really quickie, but I was just going to say that if you're uncertain, you play safe. Precautionary principle. And if Griff can come up with a sort of wording that the trigger point is brought forward, then I think that's almost a no-brainer in a way, that there's no harm in playing safer.
Yeah, unless the legislation stops you playing safe, which does happens with planning. Martin.
Thank you. Is there, if we did want to defer it, which I don't think we are, but if we did want to defer it, then presumably the developer could withdraw that application and then go with the current application and go and develop on that basis, couldn't they? If they get frustrated.
Yeah, everybody seems a bit busy. But yes, there's an extant permission. There's nothing to stop the applicant, provided they're not contravening any other non-planning legislation. Yes, is somebody coming? You're kind of coming with some suggestions about how an amendment might be phrased.
Okay, my advice would be that there's an amendment to change the triggers on, and I've just written on the back of my condition list,
Condition 14 and 15.
conditions 14 and 15. In fact, actually, if Anna just goes through and works out which conditions we're going to change, I think the wording is going to be broadly similar. So a suggestion is within time period of commencement of development or prior to the first import or export, whichever is the sooner, and then we'll carry on with the rest of the condition. So we would suggest that 4 weeks is probably a reasonable time frame. So if we have a look at condition 14, just because I've got it in front of me here, it currently says prior to the first export import of power to from the local electricity grid to the battery storage plant, a battery safety management plan shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. That might read, within 4 weeks of the commencement of development or prior to the first export, import of power to or from the local electricity grid, whichever is sooner, a battery safety management plan shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. So that would meet the tests of the condition. It's enforceable. We know that trigger is either from the dates of commencement. We might have to do some work to find out when that date of commencement is. You have a choice to add a condition for them to tell us the date that they've commenced if you wanted to. It's probably not necessary. We could work it out from other sources. So that would be our suggestion. We think it's conditions 14 and conditions 15.
14 and 15.
Okay, would somebody like to propose that? Oh, sorry, Jeremy, did you want to? Okay. Yes, technically the current proposer and seconder could, but it's probably better if somebody else does. But Dave, if you want to propose, yeah, on that basis, that amendment.
Yep.
And a seconder, Carol, Councillor Cambites. Okay. So that's the amendment. I don't think we need to debate the amendment. Should we just go straight to a vote on that, and then that becomes a substantive motion, which we can continue debating? Okay. Are we going to use the? Yeah. Okay. So if you're in favour of that amendment, then it's 1. If you're not, then it's 2. Okay. Okay, and that's passed. So,
Still waiting.
so that now becomes a substantive motion, which is officer permission with the amendment that Griff has.
Hold on.
Oh, we're still waiting for a vote. Okay.
Still waiting for one more. Daisy's just going to do something magic.
Could you perhaps try swapping your cards over, putting your card into Carol's? Will that, in case there's a problem with, and then use Carol's? Will that work? Okay, that's fine. So that is passed, and that now becomes a substantive motion, which we are debating. Anybody wish to continue debating on to permit with the amendment as agreed? Yes, Martin.
I just think I'm a little bit nervous that if we put more and more conditions on them, they'll just go back to the original planning permission. That's my concern.
Anybody else for debate on this? Yes, Millie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hearing what Councillor Pierce is saying, but I actually think it's in their interest to make this a safe development. I can't see them having a flounce and doing something they know could be better. So I'm not concerned about that, and I'm quite happy with this new amendment. And I'm also noting from the maps the proximity of the battery farm to property in Slimbridge is much, much greater than anything to do with the Wild Goose Lodge, should that come into feature at a later date.
Yes, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. As Councillor Hill says, this, I think them walking away and going with the original permission would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They know they need to change the size of the building to comply with National Grid requirements. So I don't think that's a risk. I think we should just crack on and go for it.
Technically, I should have asked Carol as a seconder of the new substantive motion if you wanted to speak. Did you want to?
I didn't second the motion. Did I speak now? I seconded the amendment. Okay. No, I haven't really got anything to add. I just think it's because it's an improvement on the previous, it makes sense to vote for it.
Okay, if nobody else wants to join in, I mean, as chair, I would just say that I think we all appreciate that the local community will still have concerns. We can't address all of them because we're in an evolving situation with the guidance and lack of legislation. But hopefully, the fact that the guidance is catching up and that there are improvements on some of the safety aspects, etc., will, and as soon as I say it, local people will start shaking their heads and saying, no, we're still not happy that we get that, but we're doing the best we can. Right, so now I think we need to vote on the substantive motion. Everybody okay with that? With as amended with the wording that Griff gave us. Okay, so if you're in favour, it's 1, against 2, 3 to abstain. Okay. So 1 to vote for the motion, 2 against and 3 to abstain. Just one. Okay, so that is passed. So that's permitted with the amendment. Okay. On 7. So should we have a 5-minute comfort break? But yeah,
We say
okay.
15:15 because it's 10.
Say 15:15. Yeah. Okay. have the committee's attention for a second about... Okay. Just getting to the point where I start throwing gavels at people. I've always wanted to. Not throw it, no. I've actually used it once. Again, not throwing, but banging. Right. Yeah, I just wanted to say that we've had a comment that some members of the public have been having problems hearing. So if everybody could lean right into your microphone and speak as loudly and clearly as you can, short of actually shouting. Right. Okay. So second item. Having said that, I've got to lean in. Okay. Land at 3 to 4 Ferndale Road, Whiteshill, Stroud, erection of 2 detached dwellings, fairly straightforward, and the case officer is Tom, who's going to introduce his report now. Okay, Tom? And if you could lean into your microphone, if you can get it as close to you as you can. Sometimes they just don't move. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
I can project, it's fine. Okay, so this is land at 3 to 4 Ferndale Road. As you can see, erection of 2 detached dwellings. The first few slides are just some photographs of the site. It's an open parcel of land associated with the dwelling that you can see directly at the end of the driveway in Whiteshill, Stroud. The access is off Victory Road and is largely surrounded by other residential dwellings. The site's within the Cotswolds National Landscape and is within the settlement development limit. I'll just show you the rest of the photos. The principle of development on the site is acceptable due to its location, subject to an appropriate design, impacts on amenity and other material considerations. The site context is here. You can just see the blue dot right in the centre. The surrounding area doesn't really have a linear built form. You've got lots of different dwelling types, detached, terrace, bungalows, 2-storey, lots of sort of backland development. Lots of, there's other examples of infill in Whiteshill. The 2 houses directly, well, the 3 directly to the southeast of the site were infill within the last sort of decade or so. The elevations show 2 split level detached dwellings. You can see them sited centrally in the plot between 4 Ferndale cottages and Highbury, so they kind of sit on the same building line as that row of dwellings. They have a gabled sort of extension at the back and a porch to the front, both of which sit sort of below the ridge of the houses, so they're quite subservient additions. The roofs have an appropriate pitch, quite shallow, and the ridge heights are sort of similar to the surrounding dwellings when shown on the plans. Just show you the sections here. So this one shows the ridge height comparably to the surrounding neighbours. In terms of plot 2, really similar sort of design and layout. They sit at slightly different levels because of the land levels of the site. So plot 1 sits slightly higher than plot 2, just because of the way the levels fall away. The application proposes sort of appropriate materials, Cotswold stone, slate roofs, some sections of timber. There's sort of a mixed palette in the area, so we think these would be fine, but obviously we've conditioned the materials, so we'd have sort of a say over that when they come in, so we can check them. The site is pretty well set down from Victory Road due to the falling land levels. So in terms of the street scene and the national landscape, it's not really going to act as an intrusion, given it's surrounded by other houses. In terms of, these are just floor plans, both the same for both dwellings. So it's four bedrooms and then living space on the lower ground floor due to the split level. The parking layout, Highways initially had some concerns, but the applicant provided this further parking layout which shows sufficient parking for both units, as well as the host dwelling, and sufficient space to turn and leave in a forward gear. So they have removed their original objection, so long as the parking and turning is conditioned prior to the occupation of the houses. In terms of residential amenity, we've had some concerns raised about the impact on amenity. The dwellings do sit quite spatially well within their surroundings. There's space left between each of the dwellings on each side. So the section through the site shows that there's a 25-metre gap between facing windows between plot 2 and the immediately adjacent dwellings to the front and rear. So that matches the recommendations of the design guide. The separation distances and the relatively low ridge heights would mean there's no overbearing or overshadowing impacts. The ridge heights are comparatively well to the surrounding dwellings. The sloping land levels of the site aid this, so the 2 new dwellings will be sat quite far away from the dwellings nearer on Victory Road, and then the dwellings to the rear are sort of 3-storey units, which are a lot taller, but they maintain that separation distance. There wouldn't be an overbearing impact from that neighbour to the rear just because the land levels fall away, as I mentioned. The window openings have been suitably sited within the units, so there would be no undue overlooking from the new window openings. And we do appreciate that obviously the land is open currently, and so there would be an impact on private views, but someone's private view is not a planning consideration, so we couldn't consider that as part of the planning process. The last point to raise is, I've just put some 3D renders on the screens which show how the units would look once complete. In terms of biodiversity, there was some confusion over securing B&G for the site. Our officer suggested that, the issue with the B&G regulations is that it tries to encourage developers in the first instance to provide the gain on site, which is good in practice, but it doesn't really work for smaller sites. It would work well for larger sites because it needs ongoing monitoring, it needs Section 106 agreements. So after some negotiations, the applicant has decided to realise the gain off-site so we can secure that by condition and the standard B&G informative. So that would need to come forward before commencement and we can secure the gain. So to summarise, the site is in a sustainable location as per the settlement hierarchy. The site is relatively large and can accommodate the footprint of the dwellings without appearing cramped. The design, appearance and materials are acceptable within an area that are a mixture of housing styles and sizes, and the Highway Authority have not objected. We've conducted a full study on the impact on residential amenity. The applicant has provided details to show that the distances meet the residential design guide, and therefore we deem the application to be compliant with policy HC1 and the relevant policies of the neighbourhood development plan. So it's recommended for permission subject to the conditions outlined.
Thanks, Tom. Okay. Right, for public speaking, we've got Councillor Jonathan Edmonds, ward member. You don't have a time limit, Jonathan, but as I always say, brevity is our friend.
Good evening, Chair and members. I'm speaking on behalf of the local residents to object to this proposal for the 2 new dwellings on adjacent land to 3 and 4 Ferndale. This is the 5th application on this site since 2018. Like I say, there has been some developments. It was a big sort of garden area. We ask that you refuse this permission principally because it fails the new legal biodiversity requirements. I know we've just had some discussion about that. but also because it creates highway amenity overdevelopment and AONB, Cotswold National Landscape harm. Our own biodiversity officer has twice confirmed the metric is wrong and incomplete. It lacks a verified baseline and no proof of degradation date and no evidence that the so-called gain area can actually be assessed or managed for 30 years. You know, under the Environmental Act of 2021 and Schedule 7A of the Town and Country Planning Act, you must know that biodiversity gain objective can be met, but this application doesn't. It defers it to a later condition, which is unlawful, as the officers themselves had warned, the biodiversity officers warned. The plans show the gain area fenced into private gardens, making delivery impossible without a Section 106. If members just take 1 point tonight, you cannot lawfully grant planning permission on an unproven BNG baseline. Highways and servicing. Obviously, yeah, the county did first object to design failures, unsafe reversing over 20 metres. And yes, we've got revised drawings. I still have concerns about some of the reversing. The two cars that are shown for Ferndale are not parked there. They actually sit across where on plot 1 where the car parking is. And I feel it's going to be very narrow, the reversing onto the drive and moving up. Talking about Victory Road, the parish has confirmed the cul-de-sac is already congested with on-street parking and limited turning, and with extra visitor cars, this would simply export more vehicles onto Victory Road to comprise pedestrian safety, contrary to policies E73 and CP13. And I witnessed that the other day coming out. There was cars coming out of that main drive, and there was cars on both sides, and I just saw the car coming out of the main drive. Amenity and overdevelopment. This is a steep backland plot. A two-split house here will sit above their neighbours, creating, in our opinion, overbearing mass and real overlooking, particularly for Kintail, which sits at the top of the plot, the north of the plot. A 25-metre window rule does not cure that. Policies ES3 and HC1 require development to respect context and topography, which this scheme has not. Like I said, the ridge height for some of those houses, like I said, they are all different heights. It's very hard to gauge, but I think it would have a significant impact on Kintail. I would argue that the distance between Kintail and plot 2 is shown as 25.08 metres, but it's not taken from the nearest part of Kintail, which is the southwest corner, reducing the distance to 24.15 metres. Regarding the Cotswold National Landscape, policy E73 demands that development conserves and enhance landscape character. Cramming 2 elevated units into a private garden may not seem from afar, but it erodes the settlement pattern, the very thing that the AONB, the Cotswold National Landscape designation, protects. Absence of distance views is not the same as conserving character. I would say that when we say that there's been a lot of infill in Whites Hill, a lot of those have, in my opinion, been on sort of garden development sites, which does degrade the national landscape, and the MPPF points of 129 and 775 resisting inappropriate garden development and harm to the land in the area. Other material risks. The contaminated land officer confirms that the site lies within 250 metres of a fill quarry or landfill, yet only an informative is proposed instead of a pre-commencement gas risk assessment. We know that obviously there's a lot of land infill sites across the district, and it is something we need to really look at moving forward. Drainage details remain generic despite the slope and proximity to neighbours. And these are not minor matters and need to be, that can be tidied up later. Taking the evidence today, the scheme conflicts with the local plan policies HC1, ES3, ES6 and ES7, the Whites Hill, Ruscombe and neighbourhood plan policies as well, BE1, TC1 and LC1 in our opinion, and the NPPF tests on safety, immunity, biodiversity and AONB protection. The benefits of 2 windfall dwellings do not outweigh these cumulative harms. So just on closing, if members could please refuse this application on at least some of the following grounds regarding biodiversity net gain, non-compliance, the legal baseline and management cannot be verified, amenity and overdevelopment harm, highway safety and servicing defects, and a failure to conserve the Cotswold National Landscape. I mean, just on closing, if the applicant wishes to come back with that lawful BNG metric and a proposed section 106, but tonight the only real safe and lawful outcome is refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before we go further, I'm going to ask Jeremy to come in with a bit of legal advice, since Jonathan's raised quite an important point about BNG legislation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, it's suggested that the council will be acting unlawfully in terms of biodiversity net gain legislation if it approves the proposals in accordance with the officer recommendation. What I've read in the report and what the officer has said this evening, I'm satisfied that the council is acting in accordance with the legislation. The Environment Act amends the Town and Country Planning Act, and there's now a statutory pre-commencement condition with respect to biodiversity, and that must be fulfilled before any development commences, and the proposals in respect of biodiversity credits are in accordance with the legislation.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Next we have John Kendrick, I think, speaking in opposition to the application. And you'll have, I'm afraid, a 4-minute time limit. There'll be a counter up on the screen if you could try and keep an eye on it. I'll let you know if you're getting close, okay? Jonathan can help you with the mic.
Thank you. I'm instructed by...
Sorry, could you just hang on a second?
Jonathan, do you mind just using the next microphone over? This one? Yeah, that one there, if that's okay. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, apparently that triggers the timer, by the sounds of it. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. I have looked at this application on behalf of those that instruct me who live in the vicinity. I'm not at ease with the council's interpretation of biodiversity net gain. The law is fairly clear, is that this should be in place before planning permission is granted. There are no details of any negotiations where any BNG gains off-site or percentages have been calculated or indeed are referenced and where they will be. This should be a calculation and a section 106 agreement which is before you this evening before you should grant planning permission. Even if you take a contrary view, we've already had a conversation or advice from one of your officers tonight about conditions, and the condition that's proposed with regard to this consent at biodiversity net gain is not one that would pass the test of enforceability or certainty. The council are in a situation whereby, should they pass this application this evening, they may well be at risk of a judicial review with regard to their activities in connection with biodiversity net gain. Not only to consolidate the objection to this proposal, the size of the dwellings and their juxtaposition in Victory Road would lead to a minimum of 26 new vehicular movements per day. And that does not include, that's with TRIX data, the national standard. They do not take into account deliveries or other services that new residents might wish to avail themselves of. So on a highways ground, it's a dangerous and difficult access and egress. As far as the effect on the Cotswold area of outstanding natural beauty and great landscape at this particular, the scheme does nothing whatsoever to either enhance or protect it, which is what the policy says it should do. It does not provide any of those opportunities on the scheme as submitted. Equally, there are other facets in connection with services. There are facets in connection with the character of the area, and certainly the amenity is one of overdevelopment. It's cramming as much as you possibly can into a minor site. It's not a balanced site, it's not a balanced development. If the scheme was for a single dwelling, I'm sure there would be more local support, and particularly from those that I represent. This is too much, too far, in too small a site. And as such, and particularly in view of the difficulties with BNG, particularly with the view of highway safety servicing and other amenity, and the effect on the AONB, I am saying to you tonight that I would ask that you refuse this application. Residential amenity, overdevelopment symptoms, layout and servicing, unresolved constraint cul-de-sac opportunities, drainage, ground risk, and particularly the issue of the land adjacent to the development site, which is contaminated land and which no tests have been made or are planned as a result of the issue of consent. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask the case officer to come back in because, again, there's some quite important issues being raised around what's actually happening with BNG. So, Tom, perhaps you clarify a bit more.
So originally the scheme proposed a significant BNG gain on site. So the applicant has engaged with our BNG officer in order to ascertain whether this was really the best way forward. The issue with having significant gain on site is that it requires a legal agreement and a 30-year period of ongoing maintenance. Now, on a site for two dwellings where there was a sort of part of the open space reserved for BNG, it didn't really feel like that was the best way forward. So following negotiations with our officer, the applicant has decided to get the BNG credits off-site, which, as far as we're concerned, is a legitimate way of meeting the biodiversity net gain, and actually is probably likely to ensure greater gain than on a piece of, former garden land in a residential area. You can provide the credits off-site where you're more likely to see that significant gain. So that can be secured by the conditions that we are using. The statutory biodiversity net gain condition is pre-commencement, so they would have to provide that information to us before anything started on the site. So that secures it pretty robustly as far as we're concerned.
And as Jeremy said, that meets our BNG legislation.
Yes, I confirm that the proposals are lawful and in accordance with the legislation.
Right, and now I've got Linda Warner, who's speaking for the application. And you'll have 4 minutes. Again, it'll be up on the timer, and I'll give you a warning if you're getting... timer's not working, so we'll give you a warning as you get close to the 4 minutes. Just going to set up a timer on the phone. Okay. Okay.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. I'm Linda, the owner and adjoining neighbour of the land. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address members this evening. There have been previous applications on this site for residential development over the past few years. We purchased the site with outline planning permission for 2 dwellings. The application before you this evening is now the result of lengthy conversations with the planning department and neighbouring residents, including a recent pre-application inquiry where the planning officer attended site with our architect. There is only one immediate neighbour now objecting to the current plans, and it is those objections I have tried to focus my comments on. The dwellings have been orientated to make the best use of the sloping site, having a single-storey front elevation facing Kintail, with the roof height matching the original outline planning permission. There were some concerns about the accuracy of the measurements provided with the previous application. Our new architect has now specifically checked this and is working from a spot level survey. With regards to privacy and overlooking, it has been suggested that the distance between the nearest proposed dwelling and Kintail is 24.15 metres, measured nearest wall to wall. We do not disagree with this. However, the 25-metre distance relates to opposing windows, not walls, and it excludes porches. So in reality, it would be greater than the 24.15 metres suggested. The residential design guide states that the 25-metre distance is not prescriptive and recognises that privacy can be achieved without strict adherence to this measurement. I am sure you have experience of applications being approved with lower distance between dwellings. That said, there appears to be no disagreement that there would be over 24 metres between any opposing windows in Kintail and the new dwellings. In addition to this, there will be a 2-metre fence and proposed landscaping to the shared boundary with Kintail, and of course the dwellings are set down the slope. As the planning officers have established, there would be no risk of overlooking or overbearing impact on any adjacent property. I would respectfully ask you to look at the section drawing provided with the application, which is to scale and shows this relationship. There have been comments made that there is no ramped approach to the dwellings. This is not the case. There is a ramped and stepped approach to meet building regulations. Finally, the parking layout was amended following the comments from Highways, and the plans now have the approval of the Highway Department with ample parking for each dwelling, cycle parking and a bin collection area. The site is a large one that has no useful purpose. It is sustainable, and if consent is forthcoming, these new family homes will be built out quickly and contribute to the district housing target. Contributions will also be made to the special conservation areas and biodiversity net gain. That concludes my points this evening. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you can support this scheme.
Thank you. Right. Questions from members is next, and just like to say I can understand concerns over BNG. Even people who work in ecology have problems with how BNG works. It's very complicated, so it's not surprising that it does cause concern. Right, so, okay, I've got Kath, and then, did somebody else have their hand up? No, Kath to start off then.
Thanks, Chair. Do we know how the biodiversity net gain is to be delivered off-site?
We don't actually need to know. It's covered by the statutory condition. I can't claim to be an expert in BNG, but I would assume there will be designated sites where people can buy credits for. Is that correct, Griff? Yeah. So it would be done in that way.
And do the conditions say, don't they, that building can't start before that's been done?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Yes, Martin and then Carol.
It might be my oversight, but I can't see a lot of reference to flood risk and drainage. Was that part of the consideration? Presumably that's part of the consideration for this, but I can't see it within the document that we were presented with.
Yeah, there's a drainage condition, so they need to provide us details of a drainage scheme before the units are occupied.
Okay, so we haven't got the information about drainage at the moment, then that's going to be a sort of condition on them commencing the building. And on the flood risk, is that similar? Is that enshrined within that?
Yeah, the site's not within a flood zone, so there's minimal flood risk in that regard. Because of the sort of geology and the topography, the drainage has been conditioned so that we get those details before it goes in. But generally these days, drainage schemes are sort of dealt with at building control. But because of the nature of the site, I felt a condition was necessary in this instance.
Carol?
Thank you. My question's about BNG as well. It's maybe a difficult one, but is it possible to give us an idea of the amount of biodiversity we're talking about, the value of that site as it is?
As it is currently? I mean, it's sort of ex-garden laid to grass, so it doesn't have a particular amount of value as far as we're aware. I mean, for the previous applications, the last application, there was ecology surveys, but they related to the refurbishment of the cottage that's already on the site, which has now been done separately because of the age and because it had bats. But in this case, it's probably pretty low level, but we've added in a condition about an ecological management plan to cover the BNG. BNG condition is also on there. And there's a biodiversity enhancement plan as well. So the applicant will need to show details of enhancements like bird and bat boxes. So there is some gain going in from the conditions.
Thank you. Just another point on biodiversity net gain. The condition 8 says, prior to above ground works on the site, a biodiversity enhancement plan shall be submitted to the local planning authority, showing this, that and the other. It doesn't say anything about the quality or acceptability of that biodiversity net gain plan. I would quite like to see a word satisfactory or something like that in. Or does it just imply it's going to be satisfactory?
So that condition more relates to sort of standard enhancements that we'd ask for on sites for new dwellings, so that you're getting some kind of gain. It doesn't matter really where the application site is. We'd usually put something on to try and encourage biodiversity. But the more important condition relating to BNG is actually in the informative 4, which is that's the statutory gain condition. Now, I'm not sure of the logistics of why, but you don't put it on as a condition, it goes on as an informative. That's the way it's written into the legislation. But they still need to discharge that condition before they can start any work. So that would give our BNG officer the chance to assess what they're doing and deem whether it's acceptable or not.
Yeah, if I try and clarify for you, there are two types of biodiversity. There's the statutory scheme, which requires 10% biodiversity net gain, and then there are other biodiversity enhancements which are not part of the statutory scheme. So the statutory scheme requires a 10%. That's the one which is in statute, and that's the one which goes on the planning permission as an informative, although it's compulsory, and that's before the commencement of development. What the planning officer has said is, in addition to this, in addition to the credits they're buying, they're also seeking further enhancements, so to speak, on the site itself, and that's what condition 8 refers to.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes it clear. It was the important thing is that the informative is compulsory. That was what worried me.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and what you actually put on depends on the site. There's going to be bird boxes, holes for hedgehogs, under fences, whatever the biodiversity officer thinks they can actually put on the site that will actually do something. Okay, any more questions? Martin?
Sorry, one more question. So on page 50 on the informatives on the matter of suspected landfill, it's 250 metres from a suspected landfill site. The wording is that the applicant developer is advised to seek independent expert advice and not required to seek that advice. Is that part of the standard wording? Because that seems a bit soft to me because it suggests that they have an option either to do it or not to do it.
Yeah, so that is a precautionary informative that our contaminated land officer will have been consulted on it. She'll have looked at our mapping system and it will flag to her where there's any sort of historic landfill or quarry or anywhere within about 250 metres of the site. So it's not something that requires a full contaminated land condition. It's more of this is just a warning that there is historically probably a quarry in Whiteshill. It's likely a quarry within 250 metres of the site. If, for example, it was an industrial site, then you'd go into more detail with the contaminated land because there's more evidence that it's been there before. But the informative really is just a precautionary measure saying, if you do discover anything, get in touch with us. But it's not enough to trigger a full contaminated land condition.
Okay, so just follow up on that last comment. So if they did, or they start development and found an issue, then through the conditions through the planning process, they would pause and it will be evaluated before they progress with the development. Is that how it would work?
We are melding different legislative regimes here. So under the planning permission, we are looking at land use, and we are reasonably satisfied that the proposed land use and operational development is not going to be affected by contaminated land. Where that risk is higher, we will apply a suite of conditions to assess that risk prior to development commencing. If one is to find contaminated land throughout building operations, be that on a site that's within 250 metres of a known quarry or any other site, then at that point our environmental protection legislation would kick in. So you've got a statutory requirement there, but it wouldn't necessarily be under the planning system. Under the planning system, we're looking to mitigate risks that we know about. We can't try and mitigate risks we don't know about. They'll fall under the statutory regime.
Okay, I've got Moya and then Gary.
I noticed that on this site in 2020, outline planning permission was already given. So what I want to try and understand is on what grounds would the current application be refused?
I'm not sure what you mean, as in how is it different to the 2020 application, or yeah?
With it being outline planning permission, so in principle, the idea of having 2 dwellings on this site was permitted. So now we've got the detail in this application. What would there be in there that would mean that it would be refused?
Well, following the outline, there was no reserved matters received, so it expired. But if they would have gone to a reserved matters stage, they would have had to address sort of exactly what's been addressed as part of this application, essentially, the design and appearance, how they were sited within the parcel of land, the highways impact, the ecology. So it would have been everything that wasn't dealt with at outline stage. So at outline, I haven't looked at that outline in particular detail because it was dealt with by another officer. The layout was, I think, slightly different, but they would still have to come in with all of the details that they've provided. They've just done it as a full application this time. So it's dealing with everything up front rather than having to come back to us and do it again.
I think to help answer your question, in 2020, they granted outline for 2 dwellings. So in terms of what you were saying, the answer is yes, development per se, in principle, was okay, subject to the details. But for whatever reason, that that outline application wasn't pursued, so it lapsed, so it doesn't exist anymore. And now they've applied for a full planning permission, which is the outline and the reserve matters together. So we're looking at everything this evening.
Yeah, and it's actually quite difficult to compare the two because you're really comparing chalk and cheese. An outline application, which is just the principle, would it be okay to put a couple of houses on there, and what we've got now in front of us, which is everything, all the details and everything. Sorry, Gary, can I have you next?
What's the gross internal area of these two developments? Do we know?
I'd have to measure it. I don't have it to hand. I'm sorry.
Okay. While you're measuring it, I'll ask. Because White's Hill got their own neighbourhood development plan, so they get a quarter of any SIL monies. Is that right? Okay. And Tom can come back in a while. Once he's measured it, it might take a while, but that's fine. That's my question.
Councillor, if I may, it might take us a little while to measure that. We might be quicker for us to look at the SIL forms.
Yeah.
I think that's somewhere where you're going. So you might want to carry on because you might get there before we do.
No, that was it.
Okay. Okay.
So the total gross for both internal is 307 square metres.
Okay. Right, any more questions? If not, then would somebody like to propose, Dave, officer advice to permit? Anybody prepared to second that? Millie? Okay, sorry, Millie just beat you to it. Okay. Right, so then we're into debate. Anybody, I should ask the seconder, which is Millie, if you'd like to speak now or reserve your right.
May I reserve my right?
Yeah, okay. Anybody else want to kick off on debate? It's looking like a very short debate. Gary?
I think we know that there's a housing shortage nationally. We know that we've got a duty to permit sustainable development. This isn't a site that is in a settlement zone. The issues with transport have been overcome over the highways. We have a basic duty to approve stuff unless there's a reason not to, and I can't see particular reason not to. I appreciate the B&G issues, but I think they've probably been resolved to my satisfaction, probably to everyone else's.
Yes, Carol, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I was a bit torn on this, which is why I didn't want to propose or second anything. But I agree with Gary, actually. I think we do need housing. It seems that I'd prefer there were smaller houses, that we had two smaller buildings rather than two big 4-bedroom ones. But we can't do anything about that. So I think my balance is towards permitting.
Yes, Dave, Martin and Dave.
Yes, I think that my contribution is similar to Carol. I mean, I think there's a presumption for development unless there's something that prevents it, that demonstrably prevents it. There is the B&G. They are required to submit an acceptable proposal before it goes ahead. That's in the condition. So I think there's protection there. The design looks okay. It does seem to be based on what the officer said, that it sits okay within the landscape, but it's not sort of dominating the surrounding areas. Highways, I understand concerns. There's always sort of concerns around highways, but the expert are the highways. Gloucester County, And if they say that this is okay, then we'll have to take their word that this is okay. And so therefore I'll be I'll be supporting this application.
Dave?
Well, I agree with what's been said. This is, in my view, this is a good application. You know, the applicants have gone through what we want them to do in many ways, which is to engage pre-application, to get feedback, to look at the potential objections, to reflect those objections in the revisions around the design, to take on board highway concerns, to take on board concerns around it being overdeveloped and overbearing. I think they've done everything we'd want them to do. And in many ways, I'm kind of frustrated that this is in front of us this evening when we all could be doing other things. And you know, the only reason it's here is because there's been concerns locally, and I think those concerns are unfounded. And I think the application is a good one. I think we should approve it. We need the housing. I agree that we need, you know, smaller housing. We need one-bed flats, but we also do need four-bed detached houses. You know, there are people with real needs here in the district, and so I'm fully behind this development. In terms of the BNG, I think the off-site solution is exactly the right way to go. It's a scrappy bit of land, with the greatest respect to the applicants, it's a scrappy bit of land. And trying to do something sensible from a BNG point of view on that land, I think would be a nonsense. So I think we're exactly right to go off-site and to get the diversity net gain off-site. It'll be a much better solution longer term. So I'm fully behind it, and I'd urge us to move to the vote and approve it.
Okay, I haven't got anybody else down, but I would agree with Dave on the BNG. There were concerns about whether you could actually provide biodiversity net gain on the site, and it's always a problem when you've got a small site with, like you said, a scrappy piece of land. Children are going to go onto it, cats, dogs. People are going to want to turn it into garden land. And making sure that stays as biodiversity net gain for 30 years on that tiny little piece of land is always good, problematic, and that's how BNG works. You've got the alternative to do it off-site and contribute towards some proper BNG, local or further away, whatever, wherever it happens to be. And yeah, there are sites quite local that are allocated for BNG. Right. Yes, you reserved your right, didn't you, Millie? Sorry about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I don't think I need to reiterate all that's been said, except to say that I agree with it, and particularly what Councillor Matthews has just said. Having visited the site, had a good look round, driven my car there, I'm content that this is a good application and I intend to support it.
Right. Okay, so in that case, we can go to the vote. If the flashers are coming up. Yeah, so it's 1 to permit, 2 not to permit, and 3 to abstain. Okay, everybody happy to press your buttons? Just me you're waiting for. Okay, that's unanimous. So that is permitted. And we've just got the one final item, which is Development Management Service, Planning Applications, Enforcement and Appeal Statistics. And Griff, our acting interim head of Development Management, is going to introduce this item. Okay.
Thank you, members. This is your twice-a-year dose of our performance statistics. I don't intend to go on it long. I told the caretakers we wouldn't be too long tonight, and I'm not far off being correct. So we cover 4 main areas here. So it's the amount of work that we receive through our planning applications. It's our planning performance against our government statistics. It's our planning enforcement work and our planning appeals work. I think the summary is overall application numbers are fluctuating, going down slightly, which represents the economic uncertainty and outlook around development. But our performance remains buoyant. And that's probably my headline summary for you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and this did come to Development Management Advisory Panel, and we thrashed it out quite thoroughly, I think, there. So if anybody's got any questions, Gary?
You said the number of applications has dropped, but it's up on last year, isn't it?
It's slightly up on last year, not as high as 20... more than last year, not as high as the year before, but there is a general trend over a couple of years which isn't represented in this graph. So we are below where we might have been a couple of years ago. We've also had a slight change in our sort of fee earning, non-fee earning. So the type of work that we do has changed slightly, which again isn't necessarily fully demonstrated in these graphs. It doesn't help that I've printed mine out in black and white, which I always think I shouldn't do when I do stats, and yet every time I always do it.
Yeah, and there's a bit of an issue around the type of applications we're getting. We're getting a lot of small applications and a lot of non-fee earning applications like listed building consent, tree applications, etc. We're not getting the kind of big applications that we would expect to be getting because everybody's waiting to see what's happening with the planning and infrastructure bill. Yes, Gary?
I presume that's discussed in development management anyway, in terms of fees and stuff like that, and because that will affect the ability to turn stuff around. If you've got 1 million trees in conservation areas, that's one thing. If you've got 1 million majors, it's a very different thing.
Yeah, I think there is the possibility that we might be able to start charging at some point for some of those. Did you want to? No?
Can do. Yes, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is talking about introducing locally set fees instead of being set by central government. We would require primary legislation and then secondary legislation and a piece of work to work out how much they cost us, because we are, under the Local Government Act, only allowed to do cost recovery. But this seems to be slightly off-piste from where we were. But yes, there are potentials in the future for us to more accurately reflect in our income the work that we put out.
As you say, because of the nature of our district, we get a lot of listed building consents, a lot of tree applications. Yes, Martin and then Carol.
Just conscious of time, I just want to very briefly on table 2 on page 57, just to positively note that the number of applications and notifications determination percentage is an all-time high. So that's very credible.
Carol?
The last thing I want to do is to give you extra work to do, but it would be really useful to have this huge other category broken down a bit. And the other thing I'd like to know is when the enforcement figures and the appeal figures, it would be useful to have those by category. So we know whether, which categories are being enforced more, which categories are more likely to go to appeal. I don't want to give you loads of work to spend ages working it out, but it would be a useful thing to know. Thank you.
Right. I think we discussed that to some extent at DMAP as well, and yeah, there is quite a lot of work involved. Right. Any more questions? Everybody happy with that? Can we just vote on that? I think we're just doing that with a raising of the hands. No? Oh, do we? Okay, sorry. I thought we were just noting. Okay. So the proposal is the committee resolves to note the report. Anybody happy to propose that? I'll propose it from the chair. Seconded by Carol Cambites. All those in favour? Up with your hands. Okay. That's fine. That's passed. Anybody wishing to vote against or abstain? No. Okay. Right.